Thanks so much, everyone, for watching. We've got an epic lineup tonight of speakers. We've got an awesome panel here. Amazing group of functional doctors, technology, activists for a leap forward in medicine.
You know, our goal is to make it easy for practitioners to learn in community.
This ecosystem that is being set up by the meetup groups, we believe will be the future ecosystem of this evolved primary care network, and it all revolves around you.
Welcome to the Functional Forum. Thanks for joining us in the charge to accelerate the evolution of medicine. Please welcome your host, James Maskell.
Hello everyone, how are you doing? It's James here, good to be with you. It is August 2020. Let's move this along, here we go. It's August 2025 and I'm here, I'm at home, and I just wanted to come here and share something really incredible. You know, about earlier this month, I had the opportunity to keynote at this Inspired IM conference. And it was really an amazing experience. One, because it was just 45 minutes away from where I was born. But I had a couple of people come up to me afterwards and they said, "Hey, James, you know, I've been in functional medicine for 10 years and I've never heard anyone share how functional medicine can become the standard of care. I've never heard anyone even talk like that. It's never even considered." And so I just thought, you know, why not take this moment to share what I shared that day, and if it's as inspiring to you or as interesting to you as it was to other people, maybe it's worth it. So here we go. I'm going to take you through this presentation, and I really hope that you enjoy it and that you get something out of it. So it was a presentation, so I had to give, you know, some of the takeaways. You will get the clarity as to the central role of social stress in chronic illness. We will also talk about innovative models for delivering community as medicine. We'll talk about new ways for solving scaling issues in functional medicine, and we'll get some industry knowledge regarding the tracking of outcomes in the transformation. And, you know, ultimately I do have a lot of disclosures because I've created a lot of stuff over the last 11 years. And ultimately it's about problem solving. I had an amazing lunch with Dr. Naomi Rusk, who runs an amazing clinic in Boulder, Colorado. And she said to me, she gave me a great compliment. She said that she thought that I was a problem solver or in functional medicine. And I think I am that. So these are all the things that I've been part of. So let's get into this. You know, this is not a surprise. Dr. Robin Berzin gave a talk before she started Parsley Health. So in September of 2014, she gave a talk where she said, the number one thing that I recommend practitioners to do is to track your outcomes. And ultimately, she was right, because Parsley Health has been able to sell into places that no one else has been able to sell into. But we haven't done a great job of it at all. I think we'd all hope that electronic health records would do that, but it doesn't. And so, you know, it's important for us to look at this again. Now, I gave this talk. This was literally about the reason I agreed to be part of this conference is because it's 45 minutes away from the place that I was born. I was born in a place called Sunrise Ranch in Colorado. That you may have attended an event at Sunrise Ranch if you're interested in permaculture. I know that the anthroposophic doctor community has their events there. I know that there's been ketamine training for doctors there. So it's a really beautiful, it's an organic valley. It used to be a spiritual community and now it is an event center. And so, you know, it's just down the road, but I was born there and I was born into this world of integrative medicine one way or another, and that's the way that I went about sharing that at the beginning of my session. So ultimately what I want to do is sort of wind it back, right? How does functional medicine become the standard of care? What problem is functional medicine really solving? And to me, the biggest thing that functional medicine is solving is the understanding that conventional medicine can't reverse or doesn't reverse or is not designed to reverse chronic illness. You know, I came from a health economics background, and ultimately, if you look at conventional medicine, you know, this is the number needed to treat. This is from Nature in 2015, and essentially says that for every person in white or in black that each of these top 10 drugs helps, for, you know, that this many people it doesn't help. So Humira is 1 in 4, Crestor is 1 in 20, Nexium 1 in 24. So what essentially this is showing is that drugs don't work for the majority of people, right? We don't have, and they're not designed to reverse chronic illness. And so ultimately, what I came to after 10 years of being in the industry was that the most likely operating system for medicine that can reverse chronic illness is functional medicine. And, that came from seeing Dr. Jeffrey Bland speak, seeing Christy Hughes share this model. And I was sitting there and thinking, this is the most likely common language. No movement has really reached a potential without having a common language. And it just felt like this was the least offensive, most obvious common language for the transformation of healthcare. And that's why we called the show the Functional Forum. And that's what led to the book, The Evolution of Medicine. It's what led to the Functional Forum, all of these areas. So why should functional medicine become the standard of care? Because it is better at delivering, it's better designed for lifestyle-driven chronic illness than conventional care. And there's lots of different parts to it, but ultimately, yes, you want lifestyle. Like lifestyle medicine is the foundation, but lifestyle medicine is necessary but not sufficient, because you also want to understand, how do we get here? What systems broke down over time to end up with a situation where you ended up having a chronic illness? That is the modern way. That is the way to understand it. And that is just reflecting what's actually happening in the body. This is what led us to run the communities, because ultimately, if you got to have a common language, but you've got to talk the language to each other. And so that's what we did with the Functional Forum communities. Now, the next question is, can chronic disease be reversed at the scale that it exists? And this was ultimately, in the email that I wrote on Saturday, I was sharing that I feel that the last 6 years have really been about experimentation. And one of the big experiments that I've been doing for the last 6 years is to understand, how can we reverse it at the scale that it exists? And back then there was no AI, right? This was pre-AI. And ultimately the exponential technology that I wanted to look at was community, because shouting self-care at people who need community care is how we fail people. And so I wrote the book, The Community Cure, and I started working on Heal Community. And if you've heard me talk before, we're just going to go through this quickly because you've probably heard all this before. But chronic disease and health is biopsychosocial in nature. And we're typically very good at all the biological, but not so good at the social, environmental, and psychological. And that's where we can have the biggest impact. You can't reverse a biopsychosocial illness with a purely physiological intervention. You have to have a biopsychosocial intervention, right? And so then if you look at the risk for chronic disease related mortality, you can see that stress is a bigger driver of all-cause mortality. And then I talk about the evolution of the group visits. This is a first group visit where instead of seeing one patient at a time, you have a group. But then you sort of see the movement, you see the effectiveness of the group model, and you see the benefits of the group model to the individual, to their interpersonal relationships, to the organization, and to the community. So this is really starting to look at the scale. How do we impact at scale? How do we have that sort of impact? And then ultimately, this is some of the foundation. If personalized medicine is definitely the future, but for people who are disempowered, it's a fairy tale. There needs to be a foundation for transformation. So then the question is, can chronic disease be reversed in an economically viable way? Because it's one thing if functional medicine can reverse chronic disease. It's another thing if it costs 10 times as much as it costs now. We got no shot. And so ultimately, I've came across this, and I believe that this is the most nuanced and valuable and powerful model out there. It's the naturopathic therapeutic order. It was created by Dr. Zeff and her colleague. And ultimately, this shows the order in which you should deliver care for chronic illness. So you start at the bottom and you work your way up, and you only go up if and only if the issue is not resolved. So you start with the social determinants of health. If that doesn't completely work it out, then you deliver on turning on the self-healing mechanisms, then support weakened systems, then address physical alignment, then natural symptom control, then synthetic relief, and then high force interventions. And I made a more simple version, which is this: empowerment groups, modality groups, nutrition groups. This is going to be the same group. So that takes care of the bottom part of it. Then you can add on integrative therapies, then functional medicine pharmaceuticals, and surgery. And ultimately, if we did care in this way, we would get the best outcomes for the lowest possible cost, because you start with the least costly intervention and work your way up. It's the least costly, least invasive intervention. You work your way up. All right. So you've heard me talk about this before, and you've seen this model if you read my book. It's the 5 Cs. And, I've shared, this over time. Ultimately, I have a new way of influencing culture, and that's the thing that I did early in the year, Healthy El Dorado. I believe that if you want to transform the culture of your community, the best thing you can do is to get all of the salutogenic practitioners together and represent them to the community in front of you. On the community side, we can now add these, different layers of community. So I've talked about Froome and the way in which just combating loneliness reduced emergency room admissions and saved a ton of money for the community there. Also, Dr. David Unwin, also from the UK. This is from the BMJ. Dr. Unwin, starting to run groups with his wife, who's a psychologist, and essentially reversing 52% of the people with type 2 diabetes with no drugs. And in fact, not just no drugs, but saving so much money on the drugs, sending these drugs back because he didn't need it, and looking how much he's spending on diabetes drugs than all these other drugs. And you definitely know that if you are if you are spending less on diabetes drugs, chances are you're going to be spending less on, all manner of medication, because these are just people getting healthier and they don't need as much medication. The total cost of care would be even more dramatic. And then we have the Cleveland Clinic. Again, I've talked about this before. Mark Hyman, talked about this and launched this on my show 11 years ago. But ultimately, Cleveland Clinic, conventional medicine, we have functional medicine that's better than that, and we have group delivered functional medicine that has better outcomes and lower cost than individual care. So the root cause is working. And we've now replicated this with Heal Community very effectively, where we've shown that this can be done virtually. It takes a cohort, so that's a group over time. But if you take a cohort of people and you enroll them into healthy behaviors in a group and you organize it well, you can improve the health of most people without any doctors. And so this is an economically feasible way, right? This could be the bottom of the pyramid. You still need the functional medicine people there in the pyramid, but you're not relying on the functional medicine to do the heavy lifting, because that is not economically feasible. Coaching, we've all seen the power of health coaching. Health coaching is proliferating all over medicine because of how effective it is. And this is a way that we can get more and more people involved. But I want to talk a lot about care for now, because ultimately, we are in a situation right now where we have to transform the delivery of care from allopathic to functional. And that's not that easy, because ultimately it's a completely different paradigm. Ultimately in conventional medicine, you would see there on the left, you would see depression, and you would know that, okay, depending on the cofactors or otherwise, you prescribe something for depression and that's it. But if you know that omega-3 deficiency, low thyroid, vitamin D deficiency, prediabetes, and antibiotic use could all lead to depression, then you have to start to thinking about practicing medicine differently, right? Because you have to understand, well, what is driving the depression? Which one of these 5 things is it? So that you can really get to the root cause of the condition, or one of these root causes. And there may be deeper root causes than that. Then on the right-hand side, if you understand that inflammation can cause depression, arthritis, cancer, diabetes, and heart disease, you have to understand that there's something more systemic that's happening, and you have to understand, that cause can create lots of conditions. So this is new for a lot of practitioners, right? A lot of doctors who especially have been trained in allopathic medicine. And so we really have to think about how we're going to get from here to there. Because from my judgment, we have been given how obvious it is that we need a new paradigm. There is a lot of friction that is preventing this paradigm from actually emerging, right? There is a lot of friction, because why hasn't it happened? Ultimately, if you go back to the thesis of the evolution of medicine, why did we recommend the micropractice? Is because there's a lot less friction in the mind of some doctor than in a health system. If you're a doctor and you're moved by this presentation right now, you can decide, I'm going to start a functional medicine direct primary care clinic. This is what I'm meant to do with my life. I can serve people. I can serve people through employers. I can charge $150 a month. The law has changed from January 1st, 2026 to make this not only possible, but reasonably easy. And you could go and do that. There's not that much friction there. There is some friction because if you're listening to this and you haven't done it, you understand all the reasons why you haven't done it. But that is a lot less friction than trying to retrain all doctors, reorganize the billing codes from pathogenesis to salutogenesis. You know, there's just so many things that can go wrong and so many things that have to change. There's a lot of friction there. So let's start with the least frictionful element, and that is the individuals. And that's why I wrote The Evolution of Medicine, and that's how we got here. And you can see that this is actually reasonably complex, right? How do you assess defense and repair? How have the defense and repair systems of the body broken down over time? How do you measure immune, inflammation, infection, mitochondria? How do you measure the microbiota and what is even useful? You know, this was created before the Human Microbiome Project. And yet, you know, all of our community understood that the beneficial microbes, and it's not just functional medicine. Benedict Lust, the naturopathic doctor, understood that in 1915. So what are we doing? Right? Energy. How do you understand energy? How do you understand biotransformation and elimination? Sounds a lot like detox. Isn't that what Gwyneth Paltrow is telling you to do? How do you get doctors to take this seriously? Anyone who's done functional medicine knows how serious this is. Anyone who's looked at a functional medicine lab knows how serious it is, right? Knows how important it is to understand the toxins in the environment. But this has not been obvious for doctors, especially ones who've been told by their medical boards that this is, you know, pseudoscience. But this is obviously true, you know, right? Transport, communication, structural integrity, assimilation. So there's all of that. Then you've got the mental, emotional, spiritual in the middle. That could be a whole thing, right? I know that we're going to have some content here in the future about function, you know, symptoms as a function, right? What are the reasons why people want to have symptoms? Why do they have symptoms in the first place? And I think that we can get into a lot of deep conversation, and we will in the upcoming new iteration of The Evolution of Medicine, you know, coming very soon. We will be talking about these types of things because there's just too much evidence of people having transformational shifts with their own physiology, you know, from talk therapy. Shouldn't be possible, but it is. Antecedents, triggers, and mediators. This is really a big part of functional medicine and an important part of really understanding what caused what. So this is a big shift for practitioners. So the question we have to ask, and this is what I want to spend the most time on, how can functional medicine be delivered efficiently enough to become a new standard? And efficiently has a lot of different pieces. Yes, the group visit thing can be done by that, but you know, ultimately, if you look back at the pyramid, you know that the groups were really taking care of the bottom half of the pyramid, but there was still functional medicine there. It's just that it's not being delivered efficiently enough. Now, there are organizations that are delivering some parts of functional medicine efficiently, or things that look like functional medicine. Function Health looks like functional medicine. Mark Hyman runs it. It's got function in the name. You get a bunch of lab tests. And, you know, you get different lab tests than you're used to. When you ask people what functional medicine is, a lot of times they'll tell you, oh, it's just do all these crazy lab tests. That's not what functional medicine is, right? That is one part of trying to get to the root cause. But ultimately, functional medicine is about the patient and the practitioner relationship. It's about systems biology. It's about really understanding all of that. Superpower, similar to function. In fact, they have the same offer to get going with that, I think for $500 a year. Fountain Life, Tony Robbins. But these are things that you might be familiar with. Look on the right-hand side, Moldco. Moldco owns the IP of Richie Shoemaker. So, you know, this is now functional medicine sort of going mainstream through a direct to consumer offering that allows people, you know, to work with practitioners virtually and will be efficient. Ravel, friend of mine started Ravel because he had Lyme disease and just found that his experience was subpar and he wanted to give other people who had Lyme a big push with that. Vale Health is a health system in Colorado that is building a big functional medicine longevity center. So people are working out how to do this efficiently. The problem is that all of these organizations here have a lot of funding and have like a lot of strategic advantages because they have technology and they have celebrity frontmen and all of these other things. What it is starting to create, though, is a situation where people have different expectations, right? New expectations from patients. And this is part of the reason why I think we're at a critical juncture here, because people are expecting membership, right? I'm going to share again at the beginning, but like from January 1st, 2026, membership, direct primary care practices are going to have a significant tailwind by meaning that it can be paid pre-tax and also can be paid for by employers. But people are expecting memberships. They're used to paying, X dollars per month for the services. Two, wearable integration. People are used to having their wearables. They know their wearables. A lot of people use them. If your doctor can't use your wearable information, that's frustrating to a patient because they can't understand why that's not possible. You understand as a doctor why it's not possible. It's not structured. It's not organized in the right way. It's not easy to be able to understand. You don't want to look at someone's app on their phone and have to scroll it through. There's too many different ones, and there's like 100 different types of wearable now, right? Smart meters, smart scales, smart homes, all of it. So it's impossible for you to think that, without any help that you could execute on this. They want holistic care. That's good because we are holistic, right? They want AI-enabled care. Most practitioners I know are using AI a little bit in the background with Claude and ChatGPT and some of these tools. They want to be able to chat to someone, right? They want to be able to have their questions answered and chat to someone on text, and they want something that's comprehensive. And your care is comprehensive. So these are some of the new expectations from patients. Now, I wrote this blog, and you can read the blog if you just Google the second practitioner problem. But ultimately, what I've come to learn in my research in the last 6 years is that the biggest issue that is facing practitioners right now in our quest for scale is this second practitioner problem. And the problem here is that if you are a great practitioner and you've spent a lot of time learning how to get good at functional medicine, the problem is when you hire a second practitioner who isn't as good as you and is just learning the ropes, and they're operating at 20% of their potential and you're operating at 80% of your potential, you can't build a business around that. All the patients are going to come in and say, no, I don't want this guy, I want you. And ultimately, that's going to cause disharmony. So we have to find a way to make it easy for the second practitioner. And in that article, I talk about Parsley Health. What did Robin do? Robin hired, and you've heard this on the Evolution of Medicine before. When I interviewed her as the one woman Evolution of Medicine, she basically created her own residency for doctors to be able to start to work and build their practice and have consistent care. She had to build an education ecosystem for practitioners from scratch, right? And so we need to solve this problem. We need a way that most practitioners can be successful from day one. And what I liken it to, and why there's a bowling alley on here, is I liken it to the idea of the bumpers that you have in a bowling alley. If you've been bowling with your kids, you know that if you roll it down, doesn't matter if you're off course, it's going to hit the bumpers and it's going to knock over some pins. Could even get a strike, even if you throw the wonkiest throw. And that's because the bumpers help the ball stay in the middle. And ultimately, what's happening when you hire the second practitioner is that they're just throwing gutter balls because they've never empowered a patient before. They're not really engaged in the same participatory way. They don't know how to engage new behaviors in patients. They don't know how to, see the wood for the trees. And ultimately, what I want to give you now is sort of like what we're going to do about it. Because ultimately, this was not a CME lecture that I gave. This was a non-CME lecture. Because I really wanted to share, from my heart at the place down the road, is that I see that we need a solution here that is going to solve for this. And I've solved a lot of things for functional medicine over the last 11 years, right? I've solved the lack of community for practitioners, that practitioners down the road from each other didn't know each other and weren't gaining confidence from each other by being friends and meeting up regularly with the meetup groups. I solved the problem of the fact that the only way you could learn about functional medicine in 2014 was to go to a conference, spend $5,000, take 5 days off and hope for the best. There was no free content online. I solved the problem of the fact that it was $200,000 to start a new clinic, and not many people could afford to spend to do that. So the functional medicine micro practice for $20,000. I solved the issue that I had for myself, which is that I don't want to buy insurance when, it doesn't cover functional medicine. So what if I could, buy something else where I could choose what I want? And that became New Health. And then Heal Community, right? How do you deliver group visits at scale? How do you deliver cohort-based functional medicine in a way that can be done on insurance and can be done, and to empower at scale? So I feel like I've got a good track record at solving problems for the practitioner community. And so I'm going to talk to you now about my thesis for how we solve this. And, my partner here is Dr. Christine Burke, because I needed someone who was an excellent clinician. I needed someone who ideally hasn't spent the last 10 years trying to be a celebrity, because I've been to those conferences where, they train you to be a celebrity. And ultimately, that's its own, it takes so much effort to do that. And if you look at the big names in functional medicine, I've written a blog on this too, I'm not sure if you want your mentor in functional medicine to be someone who is mainly a celebrity and not a clinician. You want someone who's been on the front lines. And ultimately, the reason why I chose Dr. Burke is, one, she's my doctor, lived down the road from her. She was one of the first people, she was doing functional forum meetups before the functional forum. And so we think alike, we became friendly, and I just realized how good she was at this. She's never had a heart attack in her practice in more than 20 years. How is that possible? Because ultimately she's delivering a standard of care that doesn't allow people to get a heart attack because she's going upstream, right? She has some of the best outcomes in cognitive decline. She was chosen to be part of the Eventhea trial, and ultimately she has a 4.4 average increase in MoCA score if they come in between 14 and 26. This is amazing, right? And just like David Hussey and Anne Hathaway and Kat Toops and Craig Tanio and the rest of the people in the Eventhea trial, all really good at what they do. So we created TrueNeuro because ultimately what we wanted to do is to create a way to make it easier for practitioners to get good at functional medicine. And ultimately, because we wanted to solve that second practitioner problem. And here's the thing I want to bring is that, there's many reasons we could have chosen to do anything, but ultimately we chose brain health for a number of reasons. One, we believe that brain health needed this the most, right? You can treat someone with metabolic issues without doing any fancy testing, right? You can just get your, LabCorp and look over it and see what's going on and recommend it in some cases. But with brain health, you have all of these different potential root causes that you have to understand, because hormones can affect brain health. Look at the studies that show that women who take hormone replacement have 30 to 50% less chance of dementia. Metabolic inflammation, type 3 diabetes, right? Mitochondria and nutrient status can affect it. Cardiovascular, look at the vascular tissue. That is the blood-brain barrier. That is the glycocalyx. Now, never mind toxins, obvious one, right? And then biotoxins, which was the issue with my father. So ultimately, you need to understand which one of the root causes it's doing. I've just named out the way that Dr. Burke thinks about these subsets of root cause. And that's why we decided to start here. And ultimately, this is what it does. And this is what's necessary to become the standard of care. We have to track the outcomes. We have to track the outcomes. And if your EHR is not going to do it, and doing it on paper is not going to work, we need to have software that tracks the outcomes. Simple as that. And ultimately, what sort of software would work inside the workflow of a practitioner? It would have to be something that synthesizes the data, because that is a sticking point. That is the reason why your second practitioner is not good enough to make it work, right? That is the big dog. Right? Then you have to empower the patient. No one has data, and I'm going to take my lab off on this because I'm going to talk to you directly. No one has data on the critical element that makes functional medicine what it is, and that is patient participation, right? What did you recommend to the patient is one thing, but what did they do? That is the most important thing. Right. And I want to talk to you about in conventional medicine, if you give them some drugs and you prescribe recommendation of drugs, right? It's not that difficult to work out whether they did it or not. Because if you give them a 90 cap and they're meant to take 3 a day and they run out of 30 days, it's likely they've been taking it in the right way. But what if your recommendation is to eat vegetables or to move every day or to do squats or to get 7 hours of sleep? What are we doing? One conversation when you come back, how did you do on these things? Well, obviously it's a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum, they did nothing. They implemented nothing of what you said. And on the other end of the spectrum, they did everything perfectly. But most things are going to be in the middle. It's going to be a normal distribution, right? So how are we going to learn what they did and what happened and what worked and what was meaningful? We have to track that in a effective way. And that is the power of TrueNeuro. What did you recommend and what did the patient do? Some of that information can come from the wearables. So that information comes in directly. And that's the best because it's just passively go along. Hey, I said you had to sleep for 7 hours. You slept for 7 hours. Tick. I can see it from your Oura Ring, right? But what about these other things? What about eating and so forth? And this is what the software does. So the physician sees this data. The patient sees this data. Ultimately, the patient is giving back information so that they can see what you did, and you have this closed loop system, and this is unique in that way. I want to spend a little bit of time talking. That is an important part of how we track what works, because ultimately what we need to build is a database that says, hey, the labs and the data was here, we did this, and then the labs and the data went here. Now, Dr. Burke has tons of that data, right? Because she's been organizing her practice with a spreadsheet like this for years. And so we have that sort of data, and it's already training inside the AI to help us learn what actually moves the needle. Because if you look at the state of brain care today, and if you look at the sort of delivery of this type of care, it's just throw it up against the wall and see what sticks. You have to do everything because time is brain. That is Dr. Burke's favorite saying. But ultimately, we don't really know what's working for what phenotype. We just know is that if you do all of the things, you can reverse cognitive decline. If you do all of the things and then stop doing some of the things, it can go backwards. You know, that's what we know so far. And that's what this study is showing. If you have, seen Kat Toops or anyone like that present on the Eventhia trial, there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. It's probably the most complex protocol that you have seen, but the outcomes are sensational, right? So what are we doing? We have to understand, if we want to get great outcomes at lowest cost, we have to understand what's moving the needle for which patient phenotype. Now, what I want to do right now is to show you, maybe you think you need this, maybe you don't. But I think our team at TrueNeuro is doing an amazing job of getting inside the brain of the functional medicine doctor and helping you realize just how ass backwards, or how not ass backwards, how hard your job is. Let's get into it. And tell me if I'm right in the comments below. Let's talk about lab testing. This is, to me, what you are doing as a functional medicine doctor, teaching, working on a reasonably hard case. This is what I think you're doing. This is the Cleveland Heart Lab. Look at the 5 tabs at the top. Real-time labs, Quicksilver Scientific, here's Genova, Cleveland Heart Lab, CNS vital signs, right? So this is the information that you're looking, you've got all this information on different tabs. So you go to the Cleveland Heart Lab. Now, if you are thinking in terms of root cause, metabolic inflammation, nutrients and mitochondria, cardiovascular, hormonal, and trophic, here's one page, and you're starting to basically think about how these numbers are related to these root causes, right? And they're all different. This one is vitamins and supplements. This is nutrients and mitochondria. This is genetics. So this is cardiovascular. Now this is thyroid. So you see over here, right? So this is what you're doing. But ultimately, if you look at that 16-page thing, nutrients and mitochondria, data that is related to nutrients and mitochondria is on all of these different pages. I was just on with Christine today, and she was just talking with another doctor and saying, even with LabCorp, like the thyroid-based information and comes in on different pages. So frustrating and so difficult for someone to learn, because how can you do pattern recognition if the pattern is not obvious? Are you with me? Am I right? Okay, second, cardiovascular, same test, looking for different information in different places, because it's difficult. Metabolic inflammation, looking at different places to try and get the information. So this my friends, is what your brain is doing. This. You are, from one lab test, you are synthesizing all of this information to try and understand the root cause. It is no surprise that functional medicine has not become the standard of care. Look how hard this is. The middle of the bell curve needs it to be easy. And this is not easy. This is very hard. And look, I haven't intervened in the medicine side of things at all up until now. In 11 years, it's been, first of all, content, then it's been practice management, then it's been community, then it's been another form of patient community and group visits. I haven't really gone for the jugular for the clinical side of things here because I know that this is not my place, right? This is not my thing, but this is Christine's thing. And she, was in the process of creating or had created spreadsheets that were pretty sophisticated, that would take data from these different places. It was a VA or an MA filling them all out. And that allowed her to go from 5 hours of prep for one of these tough cases to 1 hour to 10 minutes. Because ultimately the work was being done to synthesize and organize the data. That is what is needed for functional medicine to become the standard of care. We have to make it easy. It can't just be as easy as it is now. Most people won't do it. Doctors won't want to do it. Look at Quicksilver. Again, same kind of idea. Some of the things relate to nutrients. Some of the things relate to toxins. Same kind of thing. Genova Diagnostics. In fact, Genova is even harder. Look at this over here. The score is a color on a wheel. It's not that easy. This is difficult, right? This is difficult work to do, and this is coming in this kind of way. So no wonder if you feel like this. Who feels like this? So what should we do? We need to organize the data around root causes and make it easy for clinicians to see. And this is what that looks like. A metabolic inflammation score out of 100. Red is bad. Yellow and orange is okay. Green is good. Right? And you can see at a glance what's driving this dysfunction in the six subsets of root cause. You can also see, information around brain metrics and core organs. Let's look at this. In the hormonal things, you have the sex hormones together. You have the adrenal hormones together. You have the thyroid hormones together, always in the same order. Always in the same order. How else do you do pattern recognition? Hands up if this is a nightmare for you right now. You need this. This is the way to organize care in such a way that it's effective. You want to be able to sort your lab data by category or priority. So I showed you in a minute ago there, the different ways in which it was being organized, the different markers, and you can do it, in the same order every time. But maybe you want to look at what is the worst score first, so you can see what the priority is. We have that as well. And there we have patient-friendly lab visuals, right? You want to know the number. You want to know what the score is. How is it contributing to the overall score? Is it too far out of range, the functional range, the lab value, and then how it fits then in cardiovascular and metabolic inflammation in the context of omega-3, because it fits into both of those areas, right? A lot of thought has gone into this, and that thought has been created by someone who is thoughtful, right? Who is doing the work every day on the front lines and reversing the most costly chronic conditions. There's great interface for the patient, so the patient can see what's going on. And ultimately, you have a lab interface that's intuitive. You have diet, supplement, lifestyle recommendations generated by AI. You have big picture lab analysis. Ultimately, you can choose to use those things or not, right? You can just use those things or not, unlike the direct-to-consumer ones where the AI makes the recommendations, and who knows, it could be wonky. If you know that it's wonky because you're a great clinician, don't tick it, because it only gets sent if you take it and you drag it to the patient. And otherwise, the patient doesn't even know that the AI came up with it, because that's your practitioner tool. Big picture, root cause analysis. What is the big picture? What is driving the dysfunction in this person's brain? And then root cause composite scoring, longitudinal data, patient-friendly lab interface. How do you make it easy to do this? And then the next thing we have to do is, one thing to have the software The other thing is we need to make it easy to learn how to do this medicine, right? How do you get people to do this medicine? The education has to be upgraded. And ultimately, what I have started to see is that, this is really a next generation clinical mentorship, right, that we're delivering. Because ultimately, if you look at the history of mentorship, the original mentors would be like, hey, you have a great practice, you're going to come in and learn, and you're going to sort of sit with the doctor and watch them. And the original mentorship is actually like working beneath someone in a practice and learning from them directly. And that's good, but certainly not scalable and certainly not getting us to a place where we can, the standard of care, because learning by osmosis is very inefficient, right? Even though it's a good way to learn, it's very slow. It takes a long time. It takes 10 years to get good at functional medicine, right? The second one is now we have second generation, shall we say, mentorship, where practitioners who are very good start mentorship programs, and you can discuss a case once a week and you can look at all the old cases, and that's pretty good. But I think the third level is using a software every day that is mentoring you through the journey of using the software. That is the mission critical thing that needs to happen in order for this to accelerate. Because ultimately, what you want is education that goes alongside the software so that you can learn. And we believe that practitioners will be able to learn in a year what has typically taken practitioners 10 years. Not just learning the information, but the practical application, the patient success, the pattern recognition, the organization, all of it, because the software is doing the majority of the work. And you as a clinician are integrating and using the software every day. And if you're using it every day, you're going to learn a lot quicker. So we have the 6 sets of root cause. If you join, you get access to all of this, and then you're just rocking along, getting good at cognitive decline and getting good at understanding these root causes that could be applicable to any patient. We also have a lot of practice management type of stuff in there, from patient acquisition with Uli to scaling health practice theory with Seth Conger, building brain health programs. We've got all these kind of things. And this is a big part of what we believe is the next era here in the evolution of medicine. So what will it take for functional medicine to be paid for universally? Right, this is the critical thing. So it could become the standard of care. I believe that TrueNeuro can help it be the standard of care by tracking the outcomes and by rapidly increasing the number of doctors and practitioners that can do functional medicine well, right? Not just taking one training, but can do it well, can reverse chronic disease consistently. So what will it take for functional medicine to become the standard of care? All of that. Like, that's the delivery side. The delivery side of functional medicine will take that. But what will have to happen on the buy side, right? What will it take for employers who buy 50% of healthcare in America, or Medicare and Medicaid who buy 30% of healthcare in America? We've been playing for a very small part of the pie in the consumer channel. What will it take for those people to buy functional medicine at scale? It's going to take a network. It's going to take a network. I met someone who we used to work for United Health, and he worked for United and he worked for the Empire Health Plan. And in both cases, he was the guy who essentially was taking elements of holistic medicine and getting them paid for by conventional care. And listen, I can already hear you saying, I don't ever want to take insurance. I'm not billing all that. I'm not talking about billing insurance. I'm talking about getting paid $20,000 in cash for a episode of care for someone with cognitive decline, because we have proven that it will save $60,000. That's what I'm talking about, right? So don't get worried about all of the details of, how insurance billing worked, and even the success of how chiropractic and acupuncture worked in those kind of plans, because I know it's a disaster and I know it's not been good for the practitioners. So I'm super aware of that. But I guess what I have to share with you is that I'm seeing that, it will take a network, and that network has to have, 1, a common methodology, and 2, a common software around that methodology, so that it's known exactly, that there's that the work is being done in a common way. And that's ultimately, what it'll take for it to become the standard of care. So what does it look like? First of all, we have to have practitioners using TrueNeuro, using the common methodology. We're never going to get everyone to agree on the best way to do functional medicine. It's never going to happen. Even inside IFM, where they invented it and they've been teaching it for 30 years, there's a lot of disagreement about how things should be done. There's also a lot of, other places to learn functional medicine right now. Ultimately, within this niche of brain health, I think there is an opportunity to learn from that. But what we really want is a true neural network, a network of clinics that is learning from each other. Now, if you remember, and none of you will remember this, but I remember because it was my life. But back when I gave my TED Talk in 2015, I said something along the lines of, I've seen the future. I've been to Silicon Valley and I've seen the future. And it's a group of practitioners working together in a hive mind in real time, learning from each other and improving their outcomes. This is it, my friends. Here we are. I said it 10 years ago on a TED Talk, more than 10 years ago, and here we are. This is the opportunity. This is the opportunity for us to work together in a way that builds a true neural network, allows us to prove that functional medicine can be the standard of care, and allows us to win together. You can own a part of the network. You can own a node of the network. I can tell you that in all the other plans about how functional medicine becomes the standard of care, like Function Health, you're not going to own anything. Andreessen Horowitz is going to own most of it, right? That's that one. You have an opportunity to own your zip code, to own the clinic. And all you have to do is use software that costs a few dollars per patient per month. You get to own the patient. You get to own the experience. We built this software for you to go out and be successful. That is the vision. That is how functional medicine becomes the standard of care. We are starting with an illness and an issue in cognitive decline. That is massive, is going to grow substantially in the next 30 years. And there are no tools in conventional medicine for. If you want to reverse a chronic illness, if you want to reverse metabolic inflammation, GLP-1s do that pretty well. Yes, we can argue about the side effects. Yes, we can argue about all of that kind of stuff, but there is competition. There is no competition in brain health. None of the drugs work. None of the pipeline is going to work because they're all focused on single causes and it's a multimodal disease. Dale Bredesen was right. Functional medicine practitioners have been right for a long time. This is the opportunity, my friends. This is the moment, and you can own a piece of that future. And ultimately, I wanted to share one more thing, is that the world is changing in our direction, right? If we had this idea that we wanted to build the neural network, I will tell you this, that in the last little while, it's actually been unlikely in a certain way that practitioners would be able to build this kind of practice because we've all been competing for dollars post-tax. Right? People get paid, they pay their taxes, and after taxes, they may choose to spend some more of their money at your clinic. But for the first time ever, starting January 2026, we now have this, where the law has changed, where you can build a direct primary care practice. You can charge $150 a month. You can have a TrueNeuro brain protection program, and it's going to be tax deductible. That is possible. We could have 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 nodes in this network, and we could be the standard of care for brain health. We'll track all the outcomes across it, and you could own one of the nodes. This is a co-creation of epic proportions. And, throughout the last 11 years, I've been preparing us all for this moment. This is how functional medicine can become the standard of care. This is how you can own a part of the network. This is how we can work together to transform not just health, but the community itself. And I want to take a moment just to share the thesis on this, because this is what I'm here to do. Ultimately, what I've seen is that when a patient goes through a transformation like the one that they go through at a clinic like yours, it doesn't stop with health. It starts with health. Once they have the beginnings of a moment where they realize they're more powerful than they think, it starts a process in their mind that ends with them shedding their insecurities, shedding the relationships that don't serve them, shedding the BS of society, shedding the lies that they've been told, and going out and living a divinely inspired life. That is the plan. None of the problems that we see in the world are too big to be overcome if we do that at scale. And over the last 11 years, I have been learning on behalf with you all the way along. I've learned through you. Listen to the 360 podcasts that I've made on the evolution of medicine. I made those because I wanted to learn what to do. And now we get to go and co-create this together. You can own a node of the network, and we can work together to showcase the transformation of what happens to society when health care changes. I really appreciate your time and attention over the last 11 years. It's been magnificent, but this is just the beginning. In the next 11 years, we can build something so powerful, so substantial, so transformational, and so powerfully cohesive and co-created that it'll reorganize medicine with health at the front, independence, free thinking of all the principles inside. And I really want you to join me on that adventure. So get in touch with us at True Neuro if you'd like to find out more. Thank you so much for being here. In September, we will be relaunching the evolution of medicine. And a little bit about what you've heard here today is the tone of what to expect next. If this has been meaningful for you, please share it with another practitioner. If the last 10 minutes has been real for you, please share it with another practitioner and tell them what you've heard. This is an exciting time to be alive. Much responsibility is on our shoulders for this kind of transformation. And it's such an honor to be doing it with you. Thanks so much for tuning in. This has been the August Functional Forum, August 2025. What an exciting time to be alive.